Welcome everybody to today's T Level Masterclass on curriculum sequencing. I'm Peter Baker, I'm the T Level Manager, and we welcome you to today's webinar. So next slide please, Abby. Just a few housekeeping rules to start with, please. If we're not speaking, can we please keep our microphones on silent? Submit any questions that you have to the chat function. I'm joined today by two of my colleagues, Farhat and Ibrahim will be monitoring the chat to look at any questions that have been proposed. Just to let you know that today's webinar is being recorded and this recording will be sent out to people via Padlet as a link, so you'll be able to share this with colleagues as well. And lastly, just to make sure that your name and organisation is clearly displayed in your name tag on the screen, please. If you need to change that, you can click on the three dots on the top right of your screen and then change that name. Next slide, please, Abby. So I've introduced myself. My colleague, Stephen Watson, I'm going to hand over to Steve in a moment, is going to talk to you about T-levels. And we're joined, luckily, today by two colleagues from the sector. So we have Richard Stonebridge from Cirencester College talking about their model of sequencing. And then we'll be listening to Ruth Cole from Retraite Roman Catholic School to talk to us about their model of sequencing as well. Next slide, please, Abby. So what can we expect from today? So the aim of today is to help people understand a little bit more about T-levels, of course. Review some of the challenges and the opportunities for curriculum design, and Steve's going to share some of that with you today. And then consider the role and the importance of involving employers, this collaboration approach in the development of the curriculum, and we'll share some examples of that with you as well. And finally, to give you some access to resources. So when this slide deck comes out, you'll find a few links in there that will take you to some recommended resources that we help providers to access. Next slide, please, Abby. So I'm just going to go through the agenda very quickly. I'm going to move on to Steve in a moment to talk about some of the key considerations and give us that introduction to T-levels and sequencing models as well. And then I'll be handing over to Rich Stonebridge from Cirencester College, then on to Ruth. And then as we get towards the end of today's presentation, I'm just going to talk to you about the events and resources and give you a couple of dates that I want you to mark in your diaries, please. And then we're going to have a quick Q&A panel. So as I said, any questions that come up for you today, pop them into the chat function, and we'll have a little panel discussion at the end, which will be made up of myself, Steve, Ruth, and Richard, and maybe Amber, who's joining us from the DFE today, to answer any questions that people may have. We'll then close today's session, and there'll be a short satisfaction survey to find out what your thoughts are. So with no further ado, if I could now hand you over to my colleague, Steve Watterston. We'll hear from Steve, who'll give us an update and a bit of an overview on T-levels. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks very much, Pete. Abby, if we can have the next slide. Thank you very much. And the next one as well, please, Abby. So T-levels came around because of successive reviews, the Wolf review and the Sainsbury's review, and they found that the current qualification system is overly complex and doesn't necessarily serve students or employers very well. So as a result of that, a new qualification, T-levels, was developed. New, why is new important? I think new is important because it means that the specifications are up to date, and in fast moving areas such as digital, for example, this is incredibly important. And the T-level specifications potentially are more up to date than your existing level 3 VOC qualifications that you may currently be running. The fact that the 2-year qualifications gives them the same standing as A-levels in terms of duration. And there are no interim awards, so as a provider, you must make sure that you get your entrance qualifications. Sorry, somebody's saying that I'm really low on the mic. Is that true?
I can hear you, Steve, but I don't know if you can turn the volume up at all.
I can't turn the volume up, but I'll just try and talk a little bit louder.
Okay.
So there are no interim qualifications in the 2-year T level, so you must make sure your entrance qualifications and recruitment are well thought through. They're equivalent to 3 A levels, so it gives them some academic rigor with employers, but it also gives academic rigor for those students who are seeking higher education afterwards. So that's important too. They're a mixture of theory and practice, so they help to address the skills gaps that employers have identified and have been commenting on for many years. And the focus of the development of skills helps to benefit the students that when they do end up in the workplace, they arrive there with the skills that they need to start working effectively. The substantial industry placement that students actually have, they work as employees for the employer, which may be different to other smaller work experience models that currently providers are operating. And finally, they are planned to be the backbone of the new academic British standard and as part of the higher occupational strand, although the core content would also be able to be included alongside some A-level qualifications. Next slide, please, Abby. So the parts of the T level, what's in the T level? We have the core content and the occupational specialism. Now, these are the bits that separate the T levels from each other. So we have the education and childcare, we have the digital, we have the construction and so on, and they have the different core content and the occupational specialisms. In addition to that, there's the industry placement, and the majority of T levels have a 315-hour minimum industry placement, although education in early years has a longer placement for obvious reasons. Alongside the core content and the specialism and the industry placement, students are expected to continue to develop English, maths and digital. The conditions of funding would dictate that if the student doesn't have a grade 4 at English and maths at GCSE, that they still have to study these. And if they do, then the relevant English, maths and digital skills will be developed through the T level. Finally, some T levels have additional requirements or other requirements. So for example, on the catering route, there may be a food hygiene certificate, which the students need to do as part of the T level. Next slide, please, Abby. So how T levels are assessed. So the T level, there's exams and the employer set project. Now, combined together, they make up the assessment for the core. And for this academic year, the DFE have removed the need to sit the core assessment and the employer set project in the same sitting. So you have flexibility to decide where about the assessment goes, and we will talk about assessment windows slightly more when we talk about the curriculum models later on in my presentation. So alongside the core assessments, then there's the occupational specialism assignment, and this is more akin to a project and the students that the students complete within the provider setting as part of the occupational specialism. And then finally, they have the industry placement and they pass or fail that based on the number of hours they do and the competencies that they achieve whilst on that. Thank you very much. And final slide on this part, Abby, please. And I think it's important to say what are T levels not. And T levels are not repackaged vocational level 3 qualifications. And the reason they're not repackaged vocational level 3 qualifications is the content is different, as I've outlined before. The teaching is different. So in terms of teaching T levels, staff will focus more on teaching and learning with checks on understanding and application to practical situations. They are taught much more holistically with a focus on a more of a project-based approach. In addition to that, teaching spaces are being revolutionised. So there's been quite a substantial investment by the government to ensure flexibility of space to allow for traditional teaching, group work, practical sessions, as well as space to potentially have employers come in to speak to students as a group or as individuals. And finally, then there's the money that's been given to ensure that the equipment is industry standard. And I'm really excited to hear to have Richard and Ruth on this webinar, because I've been to both of the providers, and what they've done with their with the money that they've been given is fantastic, and hopefully they'll sort of talk a little bit about that when they come to their presentations. Next slide, please, Abby. So that was just a quick overview as to what T-levels are. And so the next part I'm going to talk about is a few key considerations that you need to be aware of as you start your planning journey for your T-level. So, you know, things to bear in mind, things to help you as you go through your planning. So if I could have the next slide, please, Abby. So I think the first thing that you need to consider is what T-levels will you actually offer in the first place, and these are these should be based on certain things should be helping you to base your decisions. So, for example, what employers and what employment opportunities are there locally? So, you know, you need to consider whether there are a number of employers within easy reach to sustain support of the curriculum and sustain the industry placements. If you've ascertained that there is sufficient opportunity, have you spoken to these employers to raise T-level awareness and to inquire what their business needs are and how do these meet the T-level occupational specialisms? Although T-levels are an opportunity to develop curriculum areas, you do need to consider it if there is a cohort of students who will actually want to choose that T-level. So you do need to consider what prospective students actually want. And finally, what are your strengths as a provider? So there's no secret that T-levels are quite demanding. So you need to consider your institutional expertise when deciding on your offer. And if you don't have the institutional expertise, you need to consider a recruitment plan to secure that before you actually start delivering your T-levels. Next slide, please, Abby. Further things to consider in terms of marketing. So many providers report that students, parents and employers are not fully aware of T-levels. A number of central marketing campaigns have been introduced by the DfE, but these are quite generic and are not specific to any individual provider. The best marketing is for the provider to market to their prospective students and their parents, as well as their employers about their T-levels. In addition to ensure consistency of messaging, then information and guidance needs to be considered, and potentially through the use of fact sheets. Ask yourself the question, who in your institution needs to know about T-levels? I hope the answer is everyone. So fact sheets should be used not just for IAG staff, but potentially to consistentize a message to everyone in the that works there. So your receptionist needs to know about T-levels, your support staff need to know about T-levels, your MIS staff need to know about T-levels, your employer engagement staff need to know about T-levels, your pastoral staff need to know about T-levels, as well as your curriculum staff. So you need to consider how you're going to upskill these staff and make them aware of what T-levels actually are. Experience has led us to present the sort of what prospective marketing works and what is effective, and we've discovered that showing real life examples, testimonials, case studies is very effective in attracting students, and your AoC advisor can help point you in the right direction for testimonials and case studies when you have KIT meetings. And also showcasing your employers and so that the employers showcasing that with prospective students, it entices them to come to want to work and to work alongside these employers. Finally, when it comes to marketing, you need to consider that potentially marketing might be different depending on which T-level you're marketing, and different T-levels might require different marketing because you're targeting different cohorts. So you may need to consider how that should be different. Next slide, please, Abby. In addition to marketing, another consideration should be how to get employers involved. And employers can work with providers in several ways. Here is a non-exhaustive list of different methods that providers can get employers to be part of on their T-level program. Employer engagement will be talked about during this presentation briefly, but we do explore this topic in much more detail through a series of events, the first one being a webinar taking place on the 16th of November. And we will give you the link to register for this in the chat and in the post-event materials. Next slide, please, Abby. So, to place onto your to-do list, and to place high up onto your to-do list is a key priority, and that is employer engagement and marketing need time to develop and to show the results that you need. So they must be started sooner rather than later to ensure that you have secured sufficient employers and attracted sufficient students to get them on board in order to be successful. So I can't underestimate that enough in terms of getting that started early will help you tremendously. Next slide, please, Abby. Other points to consider in terms of planning your T level would be to invest in your staff. So from our work over the past 4 years with T levels, we've been reported back a number of times that staff require a degree of upskilling to be able to deliver T levels successfully. So this will start by identifying what training your staff needs. So you need to organise some form of skills audit based around the T level specification. You may or probably already carry something like this out and do similar things as part of your normal operations. But if not, then the Education and Training Foundation, which goes by the acronym ETF, can carry out training needs analysis. Once you've identified the gaps that exist, then there are a number of places for you to go for support. And these include the AoC events and Padlet resources. And when you are given these slides, these links will take you to the events brochure and to the Padlet resources. Other places where you should be looking at going is your awarding organisations, because they will give subject-specific training in and around the T levels that the awarding organisations are responsible for, but also looking at places like Gatsby and the ETF to access the training that they give too. And the good thing about the ETF training, the Gatsby training, the AoC training is it's all free of charge. So you should be looking at trying to access these. Finally, the other place where you could go to try and access training would be your employers that you've got on board, because they will be a valuable resource in helping to upskill your staff into modern and recent industry experiences. So I urge you to speak with your employers too. The resources on how to access these resources will be shared with you later in this webinar to help you access them. Next slide, please, Abby. The final consideration that I'm going to present this afternoon is in and around the sort of pedagogical discussions. So many providers have seen the introduction of T level as a way of revising their pedagogical approach. Decisions need to be made as to whether you will deliver in a traditional method or whether you will adopt a project-based or a case studies type approach, or you might adopt a hybrid of the two. This may not necessarily be made at an institution level, as different T levels may require different approaches. I hope I have outlined already briefly the number of ways that employers can get involved, but as I said, we will be organising a webinar in the near future to help to explore these ideas much more deeply. In addition, we you should potentially consider, do you have HE partners on board for progression routes to degree level apprenticeships or to degrees? We've had a number of providers now who are looking at students coming in at level 2 and doing the T level foundation year program in the first instance, progressing there then onto the T level, doing the 2 years on the T level before they then go on to the apprenticeship or the degree. So they're seeing this as generating their own internal pipeline to feed up through to their apprenticeship and their degree courses. So this is something which you should consider too. A couple of other things just to consider in terms of flexibilities in your curriculum model. So you need to give consideration as to how this will fit into your academic year. T levels are funded higher than BTECs and other level 3 vocational courses, but the GLH and the recommended GLH for T levels are higher, and different T levels are funded at different rates, and the GLH for T levels differ between T levels too. So you need to be aware as to what the GLH is for the T levels you're planning on offering, and make sure that that fits into, and how that fits into your curriculum model. In terms of industry placement, there's flexibilities that you need to consider here too, and planning as to where and when you think that this will take place. Do you have term time versus holiday considerations? And this being in terms of convenience for the institution, but also to ensure it's meaningful in terms of the content that's been covered up to the time that the student goes out onto their industry placement. When it comes to industry placement also, you may need to consider, will it be a block placement? Will it be day release? Will it be a mixture? And will all the T levels follow the same model, or will T levels have different models? Ask yourself a question. What if a great opportunity comes by, but it's at the wrong time for curriculum? How do you cope with that, and how do you prevent that from happening? And finally, in around industry placement, how many employers will you use? So you can use up to 2 employers per student, so that you don't have to do 315 hours in the same workplace. So, consider, can we split the placement into 2 separate employers? And as I mentioned earlier, about, what about travel to industry placement? Are these employers local enough? Are they accessible for students to get there to do their industry placement? For all these considerations that I've just whizzed through, there is support and prompt questions on the T-level planner. So if you wish the T-level planner, speak to your advisor or speak to us at the AoC for information on how to get set up on the T-level planner, so that you can access these questions, these prompt questions, to help to point you in the right direction when it comes to your planning. Next slide, please, Abby. So finally, for me, going to do a quick introduction to different delivery models that you may wish to adopt or tweak as part of your planning of your T-level. So if I can have the next slide, please, Abby. So on the left-hand side of this slide, we have a kind of, here's where we currently are in terms of our vocational models, in terms of a structured, prescribed, modular and incremental approach. Students on their vocational courses will tick off assessment criteria and tick off units as they go through the time, in order to accrue what they need to accrue in order to get to the end of the qualification. If we move to the right-hand side to the T-level, we adopt teaching T-levels in a more holistic way. So it could create free space for teaching and independent learning. It can create space for preparation for assessments. It will hopefully make more flexible, responsive teaching and learning programs. So that's where we're aiming to get to in terms of our T-level delivery. Next slide, please, Abby. So in terms of considerations and thinking about this for your curriculum, T-level models vary. As mentioned earlier, the T-levels are funded higher than the BTECs and other level 3 qualifications, but the GLH are higher. So the funding and the GLH vary between different T-levels. Consideration for planning the curriculum needs to take into account how will initial assessment be taken into account for the programme, where to deliver the core and occupational requirements, where to place assessment, and where to place industry placement. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time just looking at these individually. Next slide, please, Abby. So when we're looking at initial assessment, there's a quote there at the top from the Ofsted thematic review, which was published in the summer. So I'm not going to read this to you, but we'll give you a couple of minutes just to read that yourself. So in a nutshell, it's saying that there might not be initial assessment taking place in all providers, and also in others where it is taking place, it's not necessarily used as effectively as it could be. So this is this is something that we wish to try and help you to address as we go through our support on the planning. So you should be thinking about that consideration should be given how you currently use your initial assessment information. This is not a specifically T-level issue here. This would be across all your courses really. But can you use your initial assessment to inform the delivery of your T-level? So how have your curriculum plans been adapted to respond to the assessment information? How do you currently revisit initial and then ongoing information? And do you need a development block early to develop as much needed skills? Your initial assessment might have thrown up that the students are needing to develop particular skills. So you might do that at the start to help them to develop that so that they can use these as they go through. Revisiting your ongoing assessment, your initial assessment and your ongoing assessment, helps to ensure that the students stay on track and helps you to make sure that the learning is effective and is for the students and meets the students' needs as best as possible. Next slide, please, Abby. Other things which you just need to consider would be the timing of the delivery and the assessment. So you need to consider where to deliver the core and the occupational requirements. In conjunction with this, you should consider where you place your assessments. So as I said before, and there's no there's a benefit for me to say it again, that there's now no need to sit the core exams in the employer set project at the same sitting. So this is new for this year, and this is going to allow greater flexibility for your curriculum sequencing. The other consideration to contextualize will be where you place your industry placement, and to consider, is this a block, a day release, or a mixture? Next slide, please, Abby. So many providers have adopted a model of delivering the core content in year one and sitting the assessments at the end of year one, and doing the core and the ESP at the end of year one. The benefits for this would be that students get to pass these elements in the first year and frees up some time in the second year of the course. It provides opportunities for resitting assessments if required. However, if industry placement is planned in year one, it limits to some degree what the students can do because they haven't done necessarily a lot of the occupational specialism. So when they go out onto industry placement, it limits their effectiveness when they do so. And if you're placing your industry placement towards the end of year two, there's a potential risk of that not being completed. So if I can go on to the next slide, please, Abby. So here's a sort of graphical representation of this curriculum model. So as you can see there, the core knowledge and the employer set project are starting at the start of the start of year one, and they run for year one with the assessment happening at the end of year one. Within the industry placement, there's a block there which is possibly the sort of the introduction work and the developing the skills work, but the industry placement doesn't start until after the assessment at the end of year one, at which time then the occupational specialism starts too. So if you imagine the students going out on industry placement whilst they're just about to start, or they're just starting the occupational specialism, all they can call upon is what they've learned within the core. Alongside these key elements, then you've got your English, maths, and any additional requirements where you can place, examples of where to place. So just to hopefully remind you that the assessment windows for the T levels, and these are set by the awarding organisations. So you have an assessment window at the end of year one, sort of May, June time. At the end of year one, you have an assessment window in November, December time, year two, and you have an assessment window then May, June time in year two. So there's 3 different assessment windows, and so you can plan to put your assessments where these windows are. So and there's the flexibility for you to do what you wish in terms of what's best for your provider setting. Can I have the next slide, please, Abby? Other providers have adopted a model where they're delivering the core and the occupational specialism across both years. The benefits of this will be it allows more development time for students to be ready for assessments. It allows the occupational specialism to be taught and to build upon the core content, which is being taught concurrently. This will also allow then more occupational specialism to have been delivered before the students go out onto the industry placement. So therefore the students are able to do more when they start the work experience, start the industry placement. On the downside, it provides less assessment opportunities because you may not put assessment into year one. And so this makes year two assessment heavy, but the students are older, and I should have maybe put hopefully more mature. And they will have done some industry placement. So, that should help to build the success on the assessment. So if I can have the next slide, please, Abby. Here's a graphical representation of this model. So as you can see, the core knowledge and the employer set project have started in year one, but they move across into year two, and the assessment goes into the first window in year two. We still have a bit of preparatory work for the industry placement in year one, with then the majority of the industry placement taking place into year two. But the big difference being then the occupational specialism starting early in year one. So when the students actually start that technical skills development in the industry placement, they've covered so much more occupational specialism, and so therefore they're far more effective. And then English, Maths, Digital running concurrently through this if need be. So if the students are having to resit English and Maths, then there's an opportunity to do so, plus the mandatory requirements. And that is it. Next slide, please, Abby. So that is it from me. A quick whistle-stop tour of T levels and things to give yourself, to get yourself thinking about what you need to start thinking about as you start your planning journey. You probably didn't come here to listen to me today, so I'm going to stop.
Thank you,
and I'm
Steve.
going to pass back to Pete.
Thank you for those insights, Steve. Obviously, that's born out of quite a few years' experience in working in this field as well. And there's some real golden nuggets there, things to consider when we're planning our T-level delivery as well. And sequencing is going to be a key factor in this. I think one of the golden nuggets here as well, Steve mentioned, is about this collaboration with employers and understanding what it is they need as well. So thank you ever so much for that, Steve. Really insightful. I hope everybody has got some value from that as well. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce everybody to our first guest speaker for today. This is Richard Stonebridge from Cirencester College. So over to you, please, Richard.
Hi, thanks, Pete. Yeah, just to introduce myself, I'm the Vice Principal at Cirencester College, overseeing teaching and learning, but also with a particular remit for T levels, and had quite an extensive amount of experience sort of in the design of various parts of T level. So next slide, please. And the next one, please. So I think one of the key things to recognize is probably the why we do T levels and why we were so excited about getting involved. We recognized that there was a need to prepare our learners properly for the workplace, and we weren't sure whether traditional vocationals were doing that. We knew from the skills agenda that we needed a deeper engagement with our employers, and that was a highly attractive element of T levels that we were going to be able to pull about. And ultimately, we don't know what the future is going to be, but we know that it will be different because that's what happens in FE. And we know that's guaranteed. So we've been part of phase one from the very start. And we now currently run health, digital, construction, childcare, accountancy, finance, legal, horticulture, engineering, and the foundation to T levels. So we're all in with T levels, I would have to say. Next slide, please. So before we even started our curriculum design, I think one of the key things we thought about is what did we want the learner experience to look like? And that was our key driver. So it needed to be that real world. We needed to bin that old concept of assignment time and that hoovering up of units that tended to come along with vocational education. And we had a real clear understanding of what we understood the trajectory of these learners should be, and some of those skills and attitudes that they should have. And the most important thing is how involved the industry was to there, and all those things that Steve talked about around enrichment and pushing beyond what they may have expected from education in the past. Next slide, please. So Steve gave us a great outline of those core components and what that looks like and all of those sort of things. But I think one of the key aspects within this that we recognized really early on is that although they held some similarities to traditional vocational assessments, we recognized that the mode of assessment was incredibly different, and therefore it required a different perspective, a different way of us looking at this. So next slide, please. So these were our key questions. You know, we needed to look through a different lens. We needed to think about what do the learners actually need to be able to do by the point of assessment, but also imagining what world where the employers get a work-ready learner that could just go into the workplace, and how impactful that would be for our learners. Next slide, please. My apologies for using BTEC as a general term. What I meant was traditional vocational. We know that the traditional trajectory is that it requires learners to be operating at level 3, invariably, usually by the second term. And I suppose the rhetorical question we asked ourselves was, would we ask any of our A-level students to sit paper 2 in geography or English literature without first developing those skills so that they were ready for that assessment? T levels offered us this opportunity to reimagine the way in which we delivered technical education and designed and actually follow that more traditional curve of building towards that completion and holistic and synoptic assessment. Next slide, please. So here is the basic premise, and obviously there are nuances to every single one of our T levels. We've got an extensive program that we deliver, but we view it as a 2-year program of study. Assessment occurs in year 2 when we think that the learners are going to be ready and able to be successful. Is it risky? Possibly, but if I give you some examples, we've got 100% pass rate in our childcare routes. We've got an overall 97% completion rate for all of our T levels, and in childcare we had a merit and above was over 100%. So we pride ourselves that we can actually deliver, and we know that that 2-year program and assessing those students at the end point when they're ready is incredibly important and beneficial for them. We've also protected ourselves a little bit from any potential retention hit where students may feel that they failed if they have a go at assessment a little bit too early in their maturity levels, or they may not be ready or resilient enough to understand that knockback and be able to fail forwards. And ultimately, we want the students to be immersed in the industry and get excited about the industry that they've decided that they want to go into. We use a case study approach in terms of our delivery, and so that thematic idea and that holistic wraparound of how we deliver our curriculum. So instead of teaching in silos or thinking about units in that traditional vocational model, we get teams to look at it from a case studies perspective, where we can include the core and OS and ESP. So an example for you might be, we would have a case study around Grenfell, the towers in London, where we can talk to the students about health and safety. We can talk to them about town planning. How did that high rise find itself there? But we can also look at materials and how that had an impact. And all of those could be taught usually in silos, a health and safety module or a town planning or a materials. But what we want to do is make it come to life so that the students can see how that happens and what that looks like in real life. But it also helps us for them to see it in that real world aspect. And then when we come to look at issues facing, I don't know, building on waste ground, using cargo containers, we've already included health and safety and planning and materials. And we can give examples from lots of different aspects, from health and safety, health and social care through to horticulture as well. Whilst this still is the premise, we have adjusted and started to think about where we place that greater weighting in terms of core or OS or ESP. So for example, in horticulture, we might have a greater emphasis on the skills needed for OS in September because they might be propagating, or in childcare, we have an early focus on employer set project skills and content because they need that for the industry placement and moving themselves forward in that way. So yes, we are looking at whether we will use some of the flexibility that Steve outlined as well to adopt and change our position. But our fundamental thing is that it's a 2-year program of study, and we have to ensure that the learner is ready for the assessment when it comes about. Next slide, please. And again, just sort of like re-emphasizing is that it's about making sure that we take this opportunity to reimagine the way we do technical education and design it. But it does take skill to plan and prepare, and we're really proud of the results that we've come away with as well using this model. Next slide, please. So again, another example of us using that holistic and synoptic sort of element as well, and students using you know, the laser levels to go out and do some surveying and doing some core delivery, actually getting them out and immersed in that industry element as well. I'm conscious of time, so next slide, please. We talked about employer approaches. I think from our key takeaway is that we want to share the T-level content with them. We want them to give us some case studies. We want to connect and work with them and integrate them and use them as judges for panels and on-site guests and visits and all those sort of things. And I think one of the key things that we took away is that don't start any conversation with your employer with, can you give us a 45-day placement? Because they're probably going to run a mile. But I would actually implore you to treat them as they are. They are the experts, and it's important to get them to talk about their experiences. Next slide, please. Next one on. Thank you. So the employer board concept we've got is basically inviting them in to help. We meet sort of like termly or half termly, and we basically theme them by T levels where we can, and give them an opportunity to share. And we find this is a limited ask for them. Can you get involved and talk to us about how we should shape that curriculum? What does that look like? And they can help us shape formative assessment. They can be, they know what skills are really required to prepare a learner for the industry placement. And we use our students to come in and visit them because they are a huge selling point. You watch some of our students in a boardroom with those people, and they're the ones that get you the employer engagement. They're the ones that connect with those employers because they just want to help. Next slide, please. And I think our top tips would be for employer engagement, start that conversation really early. Make sure you're clear on what you're asking your employers, and probably don't start with the 45-day placements. Be flexible and adaptable as much as you possibly can. And I would probably advocate centralizing that communication with your employers so that you don't have multiple people contacting them for sort of like employer engagement. Really try and hone that down as well. Next slide, please. I think challenges that we've faced is that we're in a really rural location, so we don't have big multinationals that we can call on. And when you've got that restriction of 2 employers, it can be quite difficult. Most of our area, we've got SMEs, but it takes time to set up that quality, good placement. Hybrid working arrangements are still a challenge, but we're starting to get traction in terms of being heard about the impact that can have, especially in digital, and just making sure that our learners are work ready, and industry preparedness is something that we're working hard on as well. Next slide, please. So I suppose my final points would be, can your teachers do it? Yes, I would absolutely implore you that everybody's got talent out there. But what I would say to you is make sure that you've got a framework for what you're looking for before they start going off and designing it. Think about the learner profile and what you want the end product to be, and then work backwards is where we've always started. And my final thing would be just be brave. It can be daunting, redesigning and reimagining, but it can also be really, really exciting. And I think it's something that we should really embrace as well. My next 2 slides are just some learner testimonies. So yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Richard. Always a pleasure to hear from Cirencester as well. We've worked with Cirencester College for some time now, and I think I can probably sum you up in a couple of words that you really are a big advocates of reflective practice and looking at what's not working and then doing something different and being willing to take that risk to make it happen. So I found that really inspirational, Richard. Thank you so much for the insight into your world there at Cirencester. And I hope everybody agrees there's some fantastic advice and guidance in there for everybody. Right, I'd like to move on now to our second speaker of the day, which is Ruth Cole from Retraite Roman Catholic School. Ruth's going to give us a short kind of overview of her model as well. So welcome, Ruth.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm the director at Retraite. We're a school based in South London. We're currently offering 5 T levels. We started in 2020 and we offer the T level foundation course. So we're a great advocate of T levels. We want to add further T levels on because of the opportunities they're giving our students. So for example, today we had one of our T level graduates come into school. She's just brokered a partnership with Amazon for us because she's now doing a degree apprenticeship with Amazon at Exeter University. So the opportunities T levels bring for your school are fantastic. Also, you'll be able to have lots of specialist facilities for your students. But I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty now of the curriculum. So Abby, if you could just go to the next slide. So I'm giving the example here of construction, but it's a similar sort of pattern across all of the 5 T levels that we do. What you will find as a school or college that's different about T levels is they're not just within one department in your organisation. So for example, the construction T level, we have 4 different teachers teaching on that. We've got like a business teacher from the business department. We've got a physics maths teacher. We've got a technology teacher. So you'll find that across your different T levels that you're going to have to work across the organisation and bring people together. So what we do is we look at the staff in the whole organisation. We look at the core content for the T level and we think, right, which members of staff could deliver that core content? What members of staff need to be skilled up in a particular area? So that's what we think about, first of all, when we're planning the T level. Then at the end of the first year, students do 2 core exams. So what we do when we're structuring the curriculum is we make sure that the students are aware of which teachers are teaching them for which paper, because we don't want to confuse the students and mix topics across papers because it makes it very difficult for them when they're coming for revision. So we make very clear to the student, this is the teacher that's teaching you for paper 1, this is the teacher that's teaching you for paper 2. And then right from the beginning of year 12, we develop the skills for the employer set project. So it's important that you build that into your curriculum right from the beginning. So like for construction, one of the things that the students have to do is they have to redesign a building. So making sure from the beginning they're having experience of architectural drawings, using the software Revit, learning how to do presentations. So really starting those things from day one is really, really important. And we've been very lucky that we've had lots of employers wanting to help us out, and we've really utilised that to kind of upskill our teachers as well as enrich the curriculum. One thing that we do here at Retraite is we do enter them for the core exams at the end of year 12 and the ESP. In some ways, we like the students to have a little bit of a shock at the end of year 12 so they can kind of see what grade they're on, and then they kind of get the opportunity in the November to do a resit if they need to. What we are finding is the grades from the ESP are very high, and the students do not need to resit that. Some students may have to resit some core exams, and at the moment they have to resit both papers in November, but obviously in the long term that may change. And then we tend to focus on the occupational specialism in year 13. So Abby, could we have the next slide, please? So what we tend to do with the employers is get them involved right at the beginning of the course. So we've had lots of our employers come in and speak to the T-level students right at the beginning of the course, so they understand the industry placement is a core element of the course, and it's really important that they understand about the organisations that they're going to be working with. If we could just have the next slide, please, Abby. So we basically, for the different areas that we're covering of the curriculum, we write case studies based on the employers that we're going to be working with. So like, for example, in construction this term, the students, they've been working with ISG. ISG came in and gave a presentation to them. Then they're going to be doing a work experience next week with ISG. So everything that we're doing in terms of the core curriculum links to this company, because when you start to look at the core exams, you'll see that all of the questions are linked to an actual scenario that would happen in the construction industry. So it's really important that whatever knowledge you're teaching the students, that you're always applying it to the sector so they get used to that. What we tend to do after the first couple of weeks, we just give them little key terms tests. Now, every half term, we give them the sort of end of unit test where they look at the employer that they've been working with, and they ask like exam style questions that link with that employer. So they're getting lots and lots of exposure to the core exam questions right from the beginning. So it's not a big shock to them when they kind of get to May and June and have to do the core exams. Because T-levels are structured so differently from A-levels that we do in the sixth form as well, we make sure that our T-level students do mock exams with the year 13 students, because obviously their real exams are at the end of year 12. So our year 12 T-level students do mocks with year 13 in December. They do mocks with year 13 in March. They have to go in the exam hall, so it's very formal. So they really understand the importance of the exams they're doing in T-levels at the end of year 12. So I think that's something you really need to speak to your students about right at the beginning of the course. And Abby, if you could have the next slide, please. So what we tend to do is we do weekly plans with the students so they know where we're at in terms of progress. We make sure we finished all the core content really by the Easter of year 12. We've been teaching ESP skills right from the beginning of year 12. And then we do a whole practice ESP just before Easter. So they do have like a 2-week window where they can do a practice run of the ESP. And then when they come back after Easter, again, we're revising for you need to have a lot of revision time because there's so much content in year 12 that obviously you want to have that revision time after Easter before they actually do their core exams and their ESP to make sure they're successful. I think it's really important that because there's so much core content to deliver, to keep it very structured in the student's mind. So what we do, each section of the syllabus, we have that for the student and they RAG rate it at the end of each half term. So for each, say for 11.1, green, I know what that means. I can apply that to industry. 11.2, that's amber. I'm still not sure about that. I've got to go and do a bit more research on that. Red, I totally don't understand. Please, can you go through that again? Because then what that means for the teacher is their revision sessions are very structured on the red. So what are the concepts the students are still finding difficult? There's no point in you just revising everything with the student, but just kind of targeting your revision. So it is a huge change in terms of assessment, but it's doable. I would say like the opportunities the T levels can bring for your students are fantastic. And because the qualifications have been written by the employer, they're really giving them the skills they need for industry. And what we do to enthuse our staff at the beginning when we're introducing new T levels is we send them all on industry insights with the employer so they can really see what's happening, and that really helps to upskill them. And as Steve was saying, take advantage of all the CPD available, because there's lots of very high quality CPD available for your staff. And then at those meetings that they go to, they'll meet other providers and they can network with other providers, because there's no point in reinventing the wheel. You can take resources that a provider's created, you can adapt them to your setting, so at least you've got some sort of starting point. Okay, thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Ruth. Next slide, please, Abby. Ruth, wonderful insights there. And again, a really, really insightful presentation there. Thank you. And again, another theme that's running through today is making learning real, where we can, giving students the opportunity to practice those skills in the real world. So thank you ever so much for those insights, Ruth, and that advice and guidance. So this kind of brings us up towards the end of today's webinar. I just want to make you aware, really, some dates to put into your diary. A lot of the topics that we've discussed today will be taking place and will be kind of key themes in the up and coming events that we've got planned for you. So the next date to put into your diary is the 16th of November for the Employer Engagement Masterclass. And then on the 13th of December, an opportunity for us to share some really good practice of what works well and what things we might want to consider to change, as well as some top tips as well. So those two events, please make sure that you pop those dates in your diary. Next is the resources. If you're not aware, we have some fantastic resources sitting on Padlet at the moment. If you're not familiar with Padlet, it's an online library, if you like, that we've developed over the last few years. And we've put quite a lot on the shelves in that library. Lots of tools, resources, videos, interviews. You'll find it really, really useful. And then finally, really, if you've not accessed the T-level support for schools and colleges on the DfE website, I highly recommend that you do that. There's been a lot of money, time and effort spent in putting these resources together for you. And in addition, on there, you'll also find access to the Connect service as well. So if you've not managed to register your school or college onto that website, this will be a great opportunity for you to do that. Outlining the T levels that you're planning to deliver. This is a shared database that employers will be able to access as well. So if they're looking to support with an industry placement, they'll be able to find you locally. So the more people that we get to use this, the better it's going to be. But there's some real fantastic resources. So we'll share these links with you when the slides go out. Thank you, everybody. Next slide, please, Abby. Okay, so just going to have a look at some questions. My colleagues have been looking at the questions that have been coming through. So Farhat Ibrahim, I can see some of these questions have been answered along the way, but can you pose some questions that have come up that may not have been answered just yet?
Yeah, we've got a question from Karen.
Okay.
I don't know whether Karen wants to ask it herself or do you want me to just read it? But she asked, are we able to place students on industry placement with our multi-academy trust schools? I don't know who's...
Does anybody want to pick that up?
Yeah, I can answer that. So you can do that. So for example, we've already made an arrangement with another school. We're not in a multi-academy trust, but in another school in the borough that we might send one of our digital skills to work with their network manager, and they might send one of their digital students to us. So you can do that.
Thank you, Bruce.
Yeah, I think it just has to be that the student has to go somewhere that's not their normal place of learning.
Thanks. Does that answer your question, Karen? I
She
hope
says
so.
yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Farhat, Ibrahim, any other questions for us?
Yeah, we've got another question in the chat, and it's asking, what's been the most challenging aspect of implementing T levels from a school's perspective? And I think
Right.
Ruth might be
Yeah,
a good
Ruth,
person to answer this.
what's been the most challenging aspect for you as a school, do you think?
Probably, I would say, like, obviously you might have to upskill some of your teachers. So the digital's quite heavy on the programming side. We had one of the teachers that was quite expert in Python, and she had to train up the rest of the staff. So probably that aspect, but there's lots of training available out there. And actually, it's really good for staff to get themselves up to current standard with regard to industry. Yeah.
So that's CPD, and as Ruth mentioned, the ETF program as well, which is free at the point of delivery to access some CPD for staff and upskilling them. Thank you, Ruth. Farhat, Ibrahim, next question.
We've got another one from Wayne. He says, are colleges finding they're having to find the employers for student industry placement, or do students still find their own?
Okay, I can answer that one. So yes, the colleges are and schools are finding placements for students, but equally you can also get students to self-source as long as you're giving them the right support and actually putting the training in place, like the telephone skills, for example, if they're phoning, cold calling employers. But both of those models work. In an ideal world, you'll maybe use a mixture of both. But if the student's struggling to find a placement on their own, the responsibility will come down to the provider to find that placement for them. Wayne, I don't know if that answers your question or whether you need us to expand a little bit more on that. Feel free to come back if you do. Okay, I'm assuming that's okay, that answer, Wayne. I've just seen a question pop up in front of my eyes now from Andrew at West Notts. Could be a silly question. I'm sure it's not. There are no silly questions. But can students swap T levels after the core, but prior to specialism? For instance, 1 year in DSP surveying and designing and swap to civil specialism. Rich, you've done construction. What are your thoughts around this?
Probably not after the first year. You have to do it within a certain window. I'll have to go back and find out what that window is. But there are some crossover core that we've created efficiency with and teach students across the board. But you just have to go careful that you make the decision on what that specialism is by a certain date. I need to find out what that is. So
I think when students are registered, they're registered on an ILR code, which is specific to that route and that specialism. So the expectation is that they finish the program that they started. Obviously, people do move in year, and I think it would be it's going back to the award and organisation, getting them re-registered onto a new course, but whether or not there's any accreditation for any of the prior learning, I'm not entirely sure. So I think what we would possibly say is it's probably not advisable, and it's not a model like everybody does the core in year one, and then at the end of year one you can pick and choose what specialism you're going to do in year two. That's not what the model the model is, that they register on the ILR code for the actual specialism that they're doing, and for unique circumstances then it's a possible a conversation with the AOs. But what I'll do is I'll take that question and pose it to one of my contacts at the ESFA just to get the correct answer, and I'll come back to people on that one.
Yeah, we'll add this into the follow-up as well. So I hope that that answers covered it for you, Andrew. I'm looking at a question that's come in from Matt R. Can we recommend a T-level textbook to support with planning for education in early years? I'm not aware of a textbook to support with planning, but how about any of my colleagues on the call?
We use the Hodder textbook for the core.
Okay. So HODDA.
HODDER.
Hodder. Okay. That's a thanks from Matt. So I haven't seen any new questions come up. So Ibrahim and Farhat, are there any questions that we've missed?
Yeah, Peter, we've got another question around assessments. So this question is around the flexibility, around the timings. So for example, we know we can do the core exams and the employer set project in year 1, but can we do the occupational paper in year 1?
Interesting question. Anybody? Anybody from the panel?
I wouldn't recommend it. Is that most of the occupational specialisms, the student needs to have been immersed in the industry to be successful in there. There are different models and different ways of delivering, and the flexibility is getting there. But I think for us, it's very much about, would the student be ready to do the occupational specialism if they hadn't had that experience in industry, if they hadn't have got the core knowledge and all of those aspects, and thinking about the weighting that's different across the board for OS as well.
Thank you, Richard. Farhat, Ibrahim, are there any other questions that we've not managed to address
Yeah,
yet?
we've got one more question.
Lovely.
What were the main challenges around coordinating the tasks of the occupational paper and the logistics around it as well?
Okay, so that's to any of our two providers that have spoken today. What are your thoughts?
I would probably say think about the human, physical, and environmental resource is larger than you might give credit for. If they're doing a controlled assessment that requires ICT functions, but also making sure that the students are prepared and ready for saving in a particular format for some awarding bodies, and just being prepared that it's especially when you have windows for assessments around controlled assessments, is that it actually starts to take up quite a large chunk of time. So take some advice on what that looks like, and I think it's the key message is it's probably larger than you may imagine.
Thank you, Richard. Bruce, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think from a school perspective, we've had to employ additional staff because most schools just have one exams officer. But once you start the T levels, because each has got to have core exams, ESP, OSP, you'll need more than one exams officer.
Brilliant, thank you.
We'll take one last one, please. Sorry.
Yes, okay.
They say, is it one size fits all approach, or what are the key differences you found between routes in terms of curriculum design and sequencing?
Good question. Richard, Ruth?
Could you repeat that question? Sorry.
So in terms of curriculum design and sequencing, what are the key differences you found between routes? Is it one size fits all, or do you have different models for different routes?
If you decide to do the education and early years, if you decide to do the license to practice, obviously that's quite different because they have to do 750 hours. So that's quite a lot more than the other T levels. So that's a thing to take into consideration. Also, you need someone who's a qualified childcare assessor as well. So that if you're thinking of doing that one, that's a big difference between the other T levels.
Thank you, Ruth.
Peter, there's a comment in from Andrew from West Notts about it's a very specific question in and around construction. Can we just make a comment to say that what we'll do is we'll get Ibrahim to contact Andrew outside of the meeting to try and
I'm conscious
help
of time as well.
Andrew with his question.
Yeah,
that's fine.
Thank you, Ibrahim. Okay, I think that's all of the questions from the chat. If we've not managed to answer any, we will be following up with this post event as well with some responses for you. So Abby, can I have the next slide, please? Okay. Actually, the next slide should be our poll on my slide deck. I'll come on to top tips in a moment. Thank you, Abby. So in a moment, my colleague Abby is going to launch a satisfaction poll for us. And I would ask if you can just take a few moments just to answer those questions on how you found today, and actually what else that you would like from events like these. That will be really, really helpful and help us in planning future events for you. So I'm going to give everybody a few moments to do that before we move into getting some top tips from everybody from our panel today, and then we'll close today's session. So thank you. I'll just give everybody a few moments to fill in a couple of questions on the poll. How are the responses looking, Abby?
Yeah, we're doing fine. You could probably just head on to the top tips just while people are finishing up.
Smashing, thank you. If you pop me on to the next slide, then that'll be amazing. Thank you. We thought we'd kind of round up for our penultimate slide here, just to have a look at some top tips from our panel as well. So we'll just give you a few top tips. Steve, what would be your top tips for sequencing?
I've got 3 top tips, Pete.
Okay, let's hear them.
The first top tip is for providers to make sure they access all support and resources that are available. So go into the T-level support for schools and colleges website. Have a look at the resources that are there. Watch the videos, the case study videos that are there, and listen to the podcasts that are there, because that's such an invaluable resource that providers should be doing so. My second top tip is start marketing and employer engagement now. And my third one is based on something that Rich said about FE is ever changing. I think the third one is plan for what you know rather than what you hope's about to happen.
Yeah, great advice.
So you can only plan for what you currently know.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Ruth, can you share some top tips with us, please?
I think obviously as a school, you'll already have employers that you work with for careers in the lower school. So start to talk to them about T-levels, start to share on social media the work you're doing with employers, get yourself on LinkedIn. That's how we've met lots of employers. And also the exam boards for each of the T-level, they generally have specific training. They have Facebook groups, etc. So join all of those.
Amazing. Thank you, Ruth. Richard, some top tips.
Top tips, start with a learner. What's their profile? What are the gaps in skills that you can foresee, and how might you address them? Engage with your employers early, and engage with them to help you design the curriculum as well. And my final tip would be just rip it up. Don't stay with what you know or that traditional vocational model. It is not that. It is something completely different, and it's really exciting. But don't stay with the norm.
Don't stay with the norm. Thank you very much, Richard. I guess some top tips for me around the industry placement would be really to echo what Richard has said, is collaborate wherever possible with these employers. Absolutely consider setting up employer board models to engage them in a more softly approach rather than directly asking them for industry placements, and build those relationships. And I think when we're marketing to employers, just be mindful of what's in it for them and make sure that those key messages are given to employers as well. So that's a few top tips that you can mull over. Next slide, please, Abby. So just a few closing comments from me. I just want to say thank you to Steve, thank you to Richard, and thank you to Ruth for some wonderful insights into what you're doing and how you've done it, more importantly, because you're both really successful colleges and a successful school with your T-level delivery. And I think I think what's come out from today for me is how being reflective on your delivery approaches can really impact and help you shape your delivery moving forward. And I think keeping an open mind is probably one of the key messages to take away from today. But what I'd also like to ask our providers on the call today is to maybe just before we log off now, just to write down one thing that you've learned today that you might do immediately after this webinar. Something you'd like to take away that would make your job slightly easier or streamline your role if possible. So just want to mention a few things now. Next steps and what you can expect from us here at the AoC. If you've not already had one, your allocated advisor will be in contact with you to arrange your kit meeting. That will be an opportunity to meet with them in person and talk through kind of what's working well and really explore any concerns that you may have, and they'll be able to offer you some advice and guidance. There'll be the National Learning event that's going to be coming up soon as well. A great opportunity for us to get together in person. They're normally brilliant events with a great lunch as well. And I think be aware of the newsletter. We've reformatted the newsletter that's coming out on a monthly basis now. And there'll be some fantastic top tips and case studies coming out on that, which should help you with planning and delivery of T-levels. They come out at the end of each month. And if you're going to attend the AoC annual conference later in November, please let your RM know that you're going to be there, and we look forward again to seeing you in person at those events as well. And then finally, you'll receive an email with the recording from today's webinar and all the resources that we've promised, plus any follow-up questions that you may put in. We'll come back with some answers on that. So I just want to say thank you very much to our speakers today. Thank you very much to everybody that's taken the time to attend. Really hope you found it useful. And I look forward to seeing your results when we go through the poll in a moment. So thank you ever so much, everybody. Have a fantastic evening and let us know if you need anything. We're always here to help. So thank you very much. Take care.